Noel, we began with this morning. And then proclaimed joy to the world for that Noel. Noel is an old French word that we believe means Christmas, is how we tend to use it today. But its older meaning is about birthday. So today we sang birthday, joy to the world. And it's not just about the birth of Christ. But today we move through the waters of the birth of Christ, and we move into the Magi showing up, and we move into the waters of Jesus' baptism. And with all of these movements, we look about how the water moved over the origins of creation in this reading from Genesis. And what we're really looking at, if we dig behind all these things, is the way that our God is revealed, the way that our God shows up in Scripture. And this morning, that is our move into how God shows up in your life, in my life, in our lives together. These Magi, these wise men from the East, as we know them from the end of the Christmas story, they saw a star and they were puzzled. And they decided to go see. That star must have meant the birth of somebody important. This was their epiphany, their revealing, their noticing of God showing up. It's not that God hasn't shown up in the past before Christmas. It's that in that star, those wise men from the East saw and had their eyes opened to the ways that God might be doing a new thing. And they needed to go see this one who God was going to do a new thing through. They had their epiphany, their aha moment when they showed up in that scene, in that house, and saw Mary and Joseph and Jesus in a manger, and they laid down their gifts before him and went home praising God just like the shepherds had done before them. Backing way up, it's not just a star that reveals the wonder of God. There's this other book called this Book of Creation. Have any of you been outside these last few days? I know it's been cold. Anyone been outside? It's been gorgeous, with the sun sparkling on the beautiful snow and the ice on the trees. On New Year's Day, my family decided to go see what the world's talking about, the icy coverings of Niagara Falls. And wow, talk about beauty and awe and majesty and all these things that cause us to go, whew, to literally have our breath taken away because it was cold, but also because of the gorgeousness and the beauty of creation. So God shows up in our lives if we notice in the beauty and the gift and the awe and the majesty of creation. That's what this reading from Genesis begins to put in front of us. Light and darkness were created, yes, and so was the rest of creation as we know the rest of this story from Genesis. God is revealed to us in the big beauty and wonder of creation, from the vastness of the stars and the planets and the galaxies and the heavens, to the teeny tininess of the smallest creature that God has created on earth. Aha, epiphany showing up. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm asked, how do I know if this thing that feels like it might be God is God? Any of you ever wondered that question? Like, you are always told in our lives to look for God, look for the ways that God shows up. I'm going to tell you that in a minute, so be ready. Look for the ways that God shows up in your life. And sometimes we talk about nature, the beauty of the natural world, or we talk about coming together in church, or we talk about our family, or feeling a little bit discouraged and someone calls us or something happens that gives us a feeling of peace in the midst of the hard things, or a feeling of life and light in the midst of the darkness. Has anyone ever asked you or said, that's a God moment? You with me? So, Jesus has one of those moments in our second gospel for today. Here at the beginning of Mark, where there's no angels and no manger and no baby Jesus and no magi and no shepherds in this gospel of Mark. Instead, Jesus is revealed coming to this kind of funky-looking itinerant preacher in the wilderness. We know, John the Baptist. And Jesus is baptized. And in the moment of his baptism, he hears this voice that says, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." So how do you know if it's God? Well, I think and I believe that one of the ways we know that it's God, that it can be a God sighting like the Magi, or like when we notice creation, or all these other places where sometimes we see God showing up, but we're not sure. It's a God sighting if for us, for our neighbor near or far, or for the world, it's a way that we hear these words and experience these words that Jesus heard at his baptism. So it's God's voice talking to you. If in the end, after working through all of the whethers or nots, you hear and you receive and you feel from God that you are God's beloved, chosen child, and that God is well pleased with you. Because you see, as we look through all these words from Scripture, we look through all the moments of our lives, in the end of all of it, our God sightings, our life with God, our life in community as church, our life outside in the world, it all comes back around to this being called by God, this experiencing God, this believing that God actually says to you, "You are my beloved child. With you I am well pleased." We celebrate Jesus' baptism today. We celebrate the epiphany to the Magi, the epiphany of the created world, the ways that God shows up. We celebrate these things. And we lift them up together because I believe we all need to hear, in big and in tiny small ways, we, all of us collectively and each one of us individually, are God's beloved daughters and sons. And that's not the end. We have to do the second half of these words that came to Jesus. With you, God says, I am well pleased. So my hope and my prayer as we start this new year and we look at life together and you all figure out what's going on in your lives and we all celebrate and commiserate and live life together. My hope in this new year is that we'll look for epiphanies in our own lives, all the ways that we go about in the world, working, playing, taking care of others. We'll look for the ways that God shows up in our lives. And we'll come together to celebrate when we say, aha, I had an epiphany. God showed up, and here's why, and here's where. And that we'll come together to celebrate the moments when we feel that spirit of being told, with you I am well pleased. And we'll come together when we need to be lifted up, when we need those words, when we're doubting whether or not, when we're doubting, when we don't feel like we are God's beloved ones, we show up again to be buoyed in the presence of one another, in the presence of God, not just here, but wherever we go. So my hope and my prayer for you is that we will see God in the church, in the created world. That we'll see God in our daily lives, and we'll be able to see the ways that God works through the events of the world, and that God gets frustrated by them, and that God, in the end, again and again and again comes back to us and says, you are my beloved ones. With you, I am well pleased. That's what we celebrate today. That's the gift of being baptized, beloved children of God. That's the gift of life together. If you hear nothing else this morning, hear me say one more time these words from God. You are my child, God says, my beloved. With you, I am well pleased. Amen.